Well, hello there and welcome back to part 9 of this beginner's guide to Photoshop elements, available right here at freephotoshop.com. If you've been working along with me, then you should have an image in front of you that looks similar to the one I have in front of me. In this video we're going to make the text stand out by adding a Photoshop effect to it, as well as building ourselves a custom border, and then we're going to go ahead and add some sharpening to bring out the details in this photograph. And by the way, if you haven't been working along with me, then you may have opened up an image from the project files that looks just like this one. The only difference you'll find is that you're working with a flattened version, by which I mean all of the elements of this image are combined onto one layer. And if that's the case, then you'll need to add some of your own text in order to follow along with this particular video. Anyhow, I'm going to start off by adding a border around the image, and here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to come up here to the select menu first of all, and then I'm going to choose the all command to select the entire image, which of course is represented by this selection outline on the border. Now I'm going to come back up to the select menu, and this time I'm going to select the modify option and then choose from its submenu the contract command. I'm going to enter a value of 25 pixels here and then click OK. And that has successfully contracted the selection outline. Next I'm going to soften the selection outline by coming back up to the select menu and choosing the feather command, and here I'll input a value of 5 pixels and click OK, which will feather the selection outline 5 pixels on the inside and 5 pixels on the outside, so we're actually getting 10 pixels of softness there. Now at the moment we have everything inside the image selected, but we want the opposite to be happening. We want everything on the perimeter to be selected so we can work on the frame. So we need to come back up here to the select menu and choose the inverse command like so. Now we have our edge pixels selected, we can go ahead and add our effect. And I'm going to do that by making sure we have our effects panel active in the first instance here. And if it's not, then you can come up here to the Windows menu and select it from the options. Now we need to make sure that we have the right layer selected, because the filter that we're going to add will be applied to the active layer. So I'm going to activate the background layer right down here at the bottom, and then I'll come up to the effects panel once again and make sure we have our filters in view by clicking on this first little icon here. Then I'm going to double click on the coloured pencil filter, which doesn't apply the filter straight away. Instead it opens up the big old filter gallery dialog box, which gives us a nice big preview of how the image will look after the application of our filter, as well as access to other artistic filters available. So theoretically we can stack them up on top of each other here. It also allows us to make changes to the filter itself. So in this case we can change the pencil width and the stroke pressure and the paper brightness. I'm going to set the pencil width to 5, the stroke pressure to 9, and the paper brightness to 0, just to keep things subtle. When we're done, I'm going to hit the OK button, and Photoshop Elements will render that filter to the active layer. Now we can go ahead and lose that selection outline by coming up here to the Select menu and choosing the Deselect command. Now if we look at the image, we have this border around the entire background layer, but because the gorilla is sitting above the background layer in the layers palette, he's hiding the effect. Now we could get around this a few different ways. Primarily we could have applied the filter to the gorilla layer as well as the background layer, but I'd say having the gorilla unaffected by the frame makes him look way towards us in the foreground, which is a nice effect in itself, so I'm going to leave things be. And while I'm on the subject of filters, by the way, you also have access to all the filters available to us up here inside the filters menu. Just thought I'd point that out whilst we're on the subject. Now to take care of the text, I'm going to start off by selecting it over here in the layers palette, and then I'm going to return to the effects panel, and instead of using a filter here, I'm going to choose the next section of effects, which just so happens to be layer styles. Next I need to select a category, so I'll navigate to this pattern section right here, and then I'm going to come down the list and look for this style right here. In fact, it's called dry mud, which I'd say is very fitting for a zoo poster. I'll double click it to apply it to the active text layer in the document, and then just to show you the level of control we have over the styles, I'm going to come down here to the text layer and see this little FX icon on the right here. I'm going to give that a double click to open up these style settings, and now I have control over the various individual styles that make up the effect. So for instance, I can give the text a drop shadow by selecting it. I could play around with the size, the distance and the opacity of the shadow itself. I'm going to accept these default values however, and click OK to accept the changes. Now just a couple of points. You're probably wondering how I chose these filters and effects so quickly. Well, just so you know, I played around with them basically before I started recording. In other words, 99% of the time you're going to find the right effect for your project by just playing around inside the effects panel and filter gallery. Also, something to note about layer styles, they're what we'd actually refer to as live effects, so a little bit like an adjustment layer, they're never actually applied directly to the pixels of the image, so you can always come back to the little FX icon and click on it to bring up the original settings that can be further modified anytime you like. Okay, well, I hope that gives you a good insight into effects here inside Photoshop Elements. What we're going to be doing now is preparing the image for output by adding some sharpening to it. And before we begin, just a quick note about the sharpening process. Generally, you're going to want to leave this right until the end of your workflow. So sharpening will be the last thing you do to the image. So if we know we want to email the photograph to somebody, we would resize it now and then sharpen it once we have the image at the correct size for the emailing process. In this example, I'm going to assume we're going to print the image out to an inkjet printer connected to the computer. So the image size and resolution of the image is right for the job in hand. In the next video, we'll focus more on the actual outputting of the image by saving it, sending it by email, printing it, archiving it and so on. But just before we get rolling here, if you want more details of the sharpening process inside Photoshop or Photoshop Elements, then check out my mini guide to sharpening available here at freephotoshop.com. Some of the videos may not be applicable because it was recorded inside the full version of Photoshop, but I definitely recommend the basic sharpening video, which visually demonstrates how the sharpening filters work. For now, let me just tell you that when you sharpen an image, you're actually increasing the contrast of neighbouring pixels inside the image. That makes the human eye believe it's seeing details brought into tighter focus, when in fact all it's really seeing is more contrast being added to the edge details to make them look sharper, to give them the appearance of looking sharper. So I'm going to start by collapsing the effects panel to give us more room to see the layers palette underneath here. And I'm going to start by turning off the visibility of the text layer, because when you're sharpening an image, you never want to sharpen text. Usually if you try to apply sharpening to text, it will just result in making it look more jagged and ugly, and we don't want to do that, so we'll turn it off. Next I'm going to use a top secret keyboard shortcut that's going to take all of the visible layers in our composition and add them to a new layer at the top of the stack. That keyboard shortcut is Control-Shift-Alt-E here on the PC. That's Command-Shift-Option-E on the Macintosh. And then I'm going to rename this layer Sharpen, because that's the only reason I'm using this layer. And by the way, you want this layer just below the text layer, so if by any chance it ends up above the text layer, just drag the layer down below the actual text layer and you'll be just fine. Now to actually apply the sharpening, I'm going to come up here to the Enhance menu and select the Adjust Sharpness command, and that's going to bring up a big dialog box to make our changes. Now if you're working with a photograph, usually you're going to want to see the Remove option set to lens blur. And by default you should start off with a view size here of 100%, which is by far the best view size for being able to gauge the sharpening effect, because at 100% you're seeing one screen pixel on your monitor represent one image pixel, so you're getting a very accurate preview of the image. And I'll go ahead and move the preview over to the lion's head, and notice when I drag on the preview window you get to see an image without any changes applied, so we get to see the image before we enter this dialog box. And when you release, you see the image with the current settings over here that we've got inputted into this dialog box. You get to see them active inside the preview window. Now just to quickly explain what these controls do, the amount slider controls the amount of sharpening you're applying to the image, so the amount of contrast you're applying to the edge detail inside the image. The radius slider controls how thick your edges become. And unfortunately there are no magic values when sharpening an image. It's just a matter of getting something that looks good on screen. So for this image I'm going to use an amount value of say 100%, and then a fairly low radius value of something like 1.2 pixels. In fact, I'm going to raise that just a little to say 1.5 pixels, and that looks pretty good there. Now to accept the changes I'm going to hit the OK button, and then to show you a before view of the image I'm going to turn off the sharpen layer, and to see how it looks with the sharpening applied I shall turn it back on again. And you may not be able to see all of this on the video, by the way. It depends on the quality of video that you're watching. Also, these videos are downsampled a touch in the production stages, so that may take away some of the effects that you're able to see on screen. Regardless of that, the great thing about having this sharpening layer above all the other layers is that we can now take out the areas that we don't want sharpened, basically. So for instance, we don't want the background elements of this photograph as sharp as the subject, so we can erase them away with the eraser tool. So I'll come over here to the toolbox and select the eraser, making sure that it's not the background or magic eraser while I'm there. That would be a disaster. Next I'll come over here to the layers palette, and I'm going to alt click on the eyeball of the sharpen layer. That's an option click on the Mac, which is going to turn off all of the layers except the sharpen one. Now I'll set the eraser to the right size for the job by using those bracket keys once again, and to make sure I'm working with a brush that's halfway between hard and soft, I'll hold down the shift key and press the left bracket key 4 times in a row, and then with the shift key still pressed I'll press the right bracket key twice in a row, and that will work perfectly as there's 4 stops between having a hard brush and a soft brush. Now I'm going to start erasing away everything in the image with exception of the gorilla and the lion. And I don't need to take too much care to get rid of all the background because I'm working with this brush that has a little softness associated with it. So I'll just go around here to get some of this, and as I say, just get as much of the background as you can without impeding on the subjects. Now I'll just erase around this area here just a little bit more as well. Just making sure that I've got everything in my image gone apart from 2 animals that are inside the photographs. Now I'm going to turn the other layers back on once I'm happy with what I've done with the eraser tool to restore the background as it was previously. And I'd say things are looking really good with this image. Luckily we still have all the layers intact, so we can still edit this image in the future. We can also quickly reapply the sharpening layer should we need to rebuild any of the other layers. For now I'm going to turn the text layer back on, as well as the second text layer I created in exactly the same way as I created the first, to see the finished version of the image. I'm going to hide away the layers palette on the right hand side here, as well as the project bin down here at the bottom of the screen, and then I'll just resize and reposition the image on screen to see the image in as good a view as we can possibly see it in. And that looks really good. I'm really happy with the finished effect that we've got using all the techniques that we've applied so far in this beginner's guide to Photoshop Elements. In the next video we're going to explore the realms of print, resampling, saving and archiving, but not necessarily in that order. Thanks for joining me here at freephotoshop.com, and I'll see you in the next video.